A Promised Land by Barack Obama. Introduction. Picture yourself in a cramped, windowless room buried deep in the White House. The air is thick with tension. Around you sit some of the most powerful people on Earth. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, your Vice President, battle-hardened generals, CIA directors, and you. You're the President. On a grainy, black-and-white screen, you watch silent figures moving through the darkness, halfway across the world. These are America's most elite soldiers, about to storm a compound. Inside that compound lives the most wanted man in history, Osama bin Laden. But here's the catch. Your intelligence isn't 100% certain. Your advisors are split right down the middle. Some are telling you to go for it. Others, including your own vice president, are practically begging you to call it off. They're reminding you of a similar mission years ago that ended in catastrophe, destroying another president's career in the process. If you're wrong, your soldiers could be captured or killed. Pakistan could become an enemy. Your presidency could implode before your eyes. If you're right, you'll bring justice to a nation still bleeding from the deepest wound it's ever known. The helicopters are approaching. A voice crackles in your ear with updates from the commander on the ground. Every single person in that room is staring at you, waiting. What do you do? That single heart-pounding moment is just one story from one of the most anticipated memoirs of our time, A Promised Land by Barack Obama. But here's what makes this book different. This isn't just another political memoir stuffed with policy details and careful diplomacy. It's a brutally honest look into the heart and mind of a man who made history, yes. But it's also a story about something much bigger. It's about finding your place in a world that doesn't always make sense. About trying to hold on to your ideals when reality keeps punching you in the face. And about discovering what it really takes to lead when the stakes couldn't possibly be higher. By the time we're done today, you won't just understand the hidden machinery of power and the crushing weight of the presidency. You'll also discover the personal journey, the doubts, the fears, the mistakes, and the unbreakable hope that carried a young, uncertain man from a lifelong search for his own identity all the way to the Oval Office. This is the story of a bet placed on a simple, audacious idea that the world as it is doesn't have to be the world as it should be. Book summary. Every great journey starts with a question, and for the young man who would become the 44th President of the United States, that question was painfully simple. Where do I belong? Long before the rallies and the history-making headlines, Barack Obama was just a confused kid wrestling with a mixed-up heritage that left him feeling like he was from everywhere and nowhere at once. The son of a white mother from Kansas and a black father from Kenya whom he barely knew, he spent his childhood bouncing between wildly different worlds, the laid-back shores of Hawaii, the bustling, impoverished streets of Indonesia. He witnessed the massive gap between rich and poor, the tensions simmering between different cultures, and the invisible hierarchies that sorted people into boxes before they even had a chance to speak. He felt like an outsider, a bunch of mismatched puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit together. And he sensed, with a quiet desperation, that unless he could somehow weave these different strands of his life into one coherent story, he might spend his entire life fundamentally alone. So he turned to books. His mother had planted a love of reading in him early on, and it became his sanctuary. He devoured the works of great writers and thinkers, searching desperately for answers. He was like a young inventor in a garage, gathering up random old parts, not quite sure what he'd build with them, but convinced they'd be useful someday. This intellectual hunger followed him to college, though he admits, with a self-deprecating laugh, that his reading list was often influenced by whatever woman he was trying to impress at the time. Marx and Marcuse, for the long-legged socialist in his dorm. Foucault and Woolf, for the ethereal artist who wore all black. But through these stumbling efforts, a worldview slowly began to crystallize. He became a student, not of politics, but of movements. He was inspired by the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement, People like John Lewis and Fannie Lou Hamer, ordinary citizens who joined together to demand something better. In their struggle, he glimpsed a different kind of power. Not power that crushes others, but power that lifts them up. This, he decided, was an ideal worth chasing. He just needed to find a place to start. After college, he moved to Chicago to become a community organizer. The work was absolutely grueling, the victories tiny and often temporary. He worked in neighborhoods devastated by the collapse of the steel industry, trying to rally people who had every reason to be cynical and burned out. He learned to listen, to ask strangers to trust him, and to taste failure and somehow get back up again. He discovered that real change wasn't about grand theories debated in lecture halls. It was about fixing a broken park, removing asbestos from a housing project, or getting a stop sign installed on a busy corner. And in those small victories, he saw something beautiful. People standing a little taller when they realized their voices actually mattered. Most importantly, Chicago gave him an answer to his lifelong question. It was there, among the working-class families on the South Side, that he finally made peace with the lingering confusion about his identity. He discovered there was no single way to be black. Just trying to be a good man was enough. He found a community. He found his purpose. But he also hit a wall. He realized that for every park they fixed, 1,000 jobs were vanishing because of some distant CEO spreadsheet decision. For every after-school program they started, an entire generation of kids was being failed by criminally underfunded schools. The power to truly transform people's lives, he concluded, lay somewhere else. It was around this time that he studied the story of Harold Washington, Chicago's first black mayor. Washington's campaign had been a political earthquake, a grassroots movement that toppled the city's old, entrenched political machine. In Washington's story, Obama saw a tantalizing new possibility, that the raw energy of a social movement could actually be channeled into electoral politics. That maybe, just maybe, you could change the system from the inside. This was the seed that would eventually grow into a presidential ambition. But it was also a choice that would test his most important relationship. Michelle LaVaughn Robinson was already a successful lawyer when they met. She was tall, brilliant, funny, and, as Obama writes with obvious affection, he was completely smitten the second he laid eyes on her. But she was also grounded in a way he wasn't. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, she understood that the road to a good life was narrow and lined with hazards on both sides. You didn't take big, reckless risks. You relied on family. Success was something to be earned slowly and protected fiercely, not gambled away on crazy dreams. And when this strange guy from Hawaii with a scruffy wardrobe walked into her life, talking about changing the world, she was both intrigued and deeply skeptical. She saw his optimism, his bizarre habit of choosing the hard path every single time. I think politics seems like it's full of people willing to do anything for power, she told him. I'm not sure you'll ever change that. Their love story weaves through the entire book, a beautiful and sometimes painful dance between his starry-eyed idealism and her clear-eyed pragmatism. She became his anchor, the person who kept him honest and connected to reality, even as his political star began its unlikely rise. And rise it did. His first run for office, a campaign for the Illinois State Senate, was a brutal crash course in the bare-knuckle realities of Chicago politics. After being endorsed by the sitting state senator Alice Palmer, who promised to step aside to run for Congress, Obama found himself blindsided when she lost her race and decided she wanted her old seat back. His advisors, Carol and Ron, saw an opening. Palmer's hastily gathered petitions were a disaster, filled with invalid signatures. They could challenge them legally and get her knocked off the ballot entirely. Obama hesitated. Something about it felt wrong. He wanted to beat her fair and square, not on a technicality. His campaign manager Carol looked at him with a mixture of genuine affection and barely contained fury. "If you let this go," she told him bluntly, "you might as well go back to being a professor, because politics is not for you. You will get chewed up, and you won't be doing anybody a damn bit of good." It was a crucial, sobering lesson. He learned that fair play was a beautiful ideal, but in the world as it actually exists, in the real arena, he discovered something about himself. He really didn't like to lose. He challenged the petitions, and he won his first election. But that victory was immediately overshadowed by a profound, devastating loss. Just as his campaign was gaining momentum, his mother, who had been diagnosed with cancer, took a sudden turn for the worse. He was in Chicago, consumed by his grand political pursuits, when his sister Maya called from Hawaii. "I think you need to come now," she said quietly. He booked a flight for the next morning, but it was already too late. A few hours later, Maya called back. Their mother was gone. The shame of not being there, of being so wrapped up in his own ambition that he missed that final moment, would haunt him forever. It was a stark, unforgiving reminder of the sacrifices his path would demand, not just from him, but from everyone he loved. His time in the Illinois State Senate was deeply frustrating. As a Democrat in the minority party, he was what they called a mushroom, kept in the dark and fed, well, you can imagine. He learned that in politics, good policy often mattered far less than raw power and relentless pressure. The sheer futility of it all began to weigh on him. And then came Malia. The birth of his first daughter in 1998 changed absolutely everything. He was overwhelmed by a joy so profound and disorienting that it completely reordered his universe. He promised himself, with fierce determination, that his kids would know him, that they would always feel his love and understand they came first. But the exhausting juggling act of 3 jobs, state senator, law professor, and civil rights attorney, put an immense, growing strain on his marriage. The arguments with Michelle grew more frequent, fueled by exhaustion and her deepening feeling that she was doing everything by herself. "This isn't what I signed up for, Barack," she told him one night, her voice filled not with anger but with a bone-deep sadness. "Is it worth it?" It was a question he couldn't honestly answer. And in that fog of uncertainty, he made what he now calls one of the dumbest choices of his entire life. He decided to run for Congress. He challenged the incumbent, a former Black Panther named Bobby Rush, and got utterly humiliatingly destroyed. He lost by 30 brutal points. The race was a disaster from start to finish, leaving him broke, publicly humiliated, and with his marriage more strained than it had ever been. He was almost 40 years old, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had taken a serious wrong turn. He realized his ambition wasn't purely about service. It was tangled up with ego, with proving himself, with trying to fill some unnamed hole inside him. He had become the very thing he'd warned himself against, just another politician, and not even a particularly good one. After that crushing defeat, something fundamental shifted inside him. He let go. He refocused on his family, on being a genuinely better husband and father. He found joy in the small, ordinary moments, reading Harry Potter to Malia at bedtime, watching baby Sasha's face light up with laughter as he nibbled her tiny feet. He started seriously thinking about a life after politics. It should have been enough. But 2 things kept pulling him back into the arena. First, the political landscape in Illinois shifted, giving Democrats real power and him an actual chance to finally pass meaningful legislation. But more importantly, he couldn't shake a deeper conviction. As he traveled across the state, from the struggling inner city of Chicago to the small, dying farm towns downstate, he witnessed something powerful. People, no matter their background or beliefs, shared the same basic hopes and values. He realized that our politics would never truly change as long as we remained complete strangers to one another. And then the audacious thought began forming in his mind. What if a campaign could actually bridge those divides? Not a narrow congressional race, but something bigger, a statewide race, a race for the United States Senate. It was a breathtaking gamble. As his friend and future chief strategist David Axelrod told him, with characteristic bluntness, it was a massive reach. His name rhymed with Osama. He was coming off a humiliating loss. The odds were absolutely terrible. But Obama saw a narrow path to victory, a tiny opening. This time, he promised Michelle would be genuinely different. This was it. Up or out. If he lost this one, he was done with politics for good. Michelle's skepticism was legendary in their circle. When he tried to explain his financial plan, that if he won, he'd write another book, and the advance would somehow cover their mounting expenses, she actually laughed out loud. "You have some magic beans," she told him, "and you're going to plant them, and a huge beanstalk is going to grow. Is that it?" "Something like that," he admitted sheepishly. She gave him her blessing, but made it clear she wasn't giving him her vote of confidence. "One last time," she said firmly, "but don't expect me to do any campaigning." The 2004 Senate race, which had seemed so impossibly unlikely, turned out to be almost charmed. His early, politically risky opposition to the Iraq War suddenly looked prophetic. His Republican opponent dropped out after a scandal. And then came the phone call that would fundamentally change his life and, eventually, the entire course of American history. He was invited to give the keynote address at the 2004 Democratic National Convention. He knew exactly what he wanted to say. He didn't just write a speech. He wove together the entire story of his life, his lifelong search for belonging, his unshakable faith in the common threads that bind us together, and his stubborn belief in the promise of America. He remembered a powerful phrase from a sermon by his pastor Jeremiah Wright, "The audacity of hope." The speech was absolutely electric. On that stage in Boston, he found his true voice, and in that voice, millions of Americans heard an echo of their own highest aspirations. "There is not a liberal America and a conservative America," he declared with conviction. "There's the United States of America." He was shot from a cannon into the national consciousness. Overnight, he became a genuine phenomenon. He won his Senate race by the largest margin in Illinois history. But he barely had time to catch his breath before the whispers started, almost immediately. Will he run for president? He tried to be what they call a workhorse, not a show horse, focusing seriously on his job as a junior senator. But the tide of expectation and possibility was simply too strong. Senior figures in his own party, including Harry Reid and Ted Kennedy, quietly urged him to seriously consider it. "You don't choose the time," Kennedy told him with the weight of experience. "The time chooses you." The decision to run for president in 2008 was the hardest yet. It was another massive disruption, another enormous gamble, another deliberate step in a direction he desperately wanted, and Michelle truly, genuinely didn't. In a tense, emotional conversation, she finally laid it all out on the table. "Did you say we?" she asked pointedly. "You mean you, Barack. This is your thing." Her voice was thick with emotion. "God, Barack, when is it going to be enough?" It was a question he couldn't honestly answer, and they both knew it. He understood the race would be a brutal, soul-crushing marathon. He was up against a political giant in Hillary Clinton. The odds were stacked heavily against him. But he also knew, deep in his bones, that this was his moment of reckoning. He had made a bet a long time ago, a bet on himself, a bet on the country, and he had to see how it would all play out. The 2008 campaign was an absolute crucible. The early days were a genuine grind. He was grumpy, perpetually exhausted, and frankly, not a very good candidate at first. He was too wordy, too much like a professor giving a lecture. But his team, led by the brilliant and obsessively disciplined David Plouffe, built something genuinely revolutionary, a grassroots organization unlike anything American politics had ever seen. They focused with laser intensity on the first contest in Iowa, believing it was their only real path to victory. They built a campaign not around a traditional candidate, but around a movement, empowering hundreds of young organizers to build deep connections in communities across the entire state. The Iowa caucus was a stunning, history-making upset. Obama won decisively, propelled by an unprecedented wave of young people and first-time voters who believed change was actually possible. The victory proved he was a legitimate contender. But just as quickly the momentum shifted. He lost the New Hampshire primary just 5 days later. The press gleefully wrote him off as a flash in the pan. It was a brutal lesson in the dizzying highs and crushing lows of national politics, but it was also a crucial test of his resilience. That night, speaking to a disheartened crowd in a hotel ballroom, he gave one of the most important speeches of his entire campaign. He found a new rallying cry, a simple creed that perfectly captured the spirit of his movement: "Yes, we can." The battle with Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination became an epic state-by-state slugfest that lasted for months. It was a clash of generations, of contrasting styles, and of two fundamentally different theories about how change actually happens. But it was also a fight that forced him to sharpen his arguments and truly find his authentic voice. Nowhere was that more evident than in South Carolina. After a brutal, racially charged campaign, he won by a stunning 2-to-1 margin, proving he could win not just in overwhelmingly white states like Iowa, but with the kind of diverse coalition that actually looked like America. The nomination was finally his after a grueling battle, but an even bigger challenge immediately loomed: John McCain, a genuine American hero with decades of experience. And then, as if the stakes weren't high enough, the world started falling apart around them. The financial crisis of 2008 exploded right in the middle of the general election, a full-blown meltdown of the global economy. It was a once-in-a-generation catastrophe, and it landed squarely in the middle of a presidential campaign. In a moment of high political drama, McCain made a bold move. He called for both campaigns to suspend and return to Washington to solve the crisis together. It was a political gambit, and one that could have easily worked in his favor. Obama made a very different choice. He calmly argued that a president has to be capable of doing more than one thing at a time, and that the crisis made it more important, not less, for the American people to hear clearly from the two men who wanted to lead them through it. It was a defining moment, a powerful display of steady leadership when the entire world felt dangerously unsteady. He won the presidency on November 4, 2008, riding a historic wave of hope and an inspiring promise of fundamental change. But on his very first visit to the Oval Office as president-elect, George W. Bush gave him a jarring dose of reality. "The good news, Barack," Bush told him with apparent sincerity, "is that by the time you actually take office, we'll have taken care of the really tough stuff for you. You'll be able to start with a clean slate." It was a statement so bizarrely disconnected from reality that Obama was momentarily speechless. He was inheriting two ongoing wars and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. His team's first comprehensive economic briefing was so genuinely grim that his top economic advisor later called it Obama's holy shit moment. The economy was hemorrhaging hundreds of thousands of jobs every single month. The financial system was teetering on the edge of complete collapse. The entire auto industry was about to go under, taking millions of jobs with it. There was no clean slate. There was only a Category 5 storm bearing down on him. His first year in office was an absolute blur of non-stop crisis management. He pushed through a nearly $800 billion economic stimulus package, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, a massive effort to stop the economic bleeding and prevent a second Great Depression. The political fight was absolutely brutal. He got it passed with almost zero Republican support, an early and ominous sign of the relentless obstruction he would face for the next 8 years. Then came the monumental fight for healthcare reform. It was the great, unfinished business of American society, the cause that had consumed Ted Kennedy's entire career, and a deeply personal issue for Obama. The battle for what would eventually become the Affordable Care Act was a year-long, exhausting legislative street fight. It was a messy, ugly sausage-making process, filled with backroom deals, painful compromises, and multiple moments where it seemed like the whole thing would collapse. The shocking loss of Ted Kennedy's Senate seat in a special election in Massachusetts in early 2010 seemed to be the final nail in the coffin. His own chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, bluntly told him it was time to scale back, to settle for a smaller, less ambitious bill that might actually pass. But Obama flat out refused to give up. He knew in his bones this might be his only real chance. He put his entire presidency on the line, and with the masterful legislative skill of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, they somehow pushed the bill across the finish line by the absolute slimmest of margins. The night it finally passed wasn't just a political victory. It was a promise fulfilled to millions of Americans. But for every hard-won step forward, a new crisis seemed to instantly emerge. In April 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, unleashing the worst environmental disaster in American history. For 87 agonizing days, oil gushed relentlessly into the ocean from a ruptured pipe a mile beneath the surface. The live video feed of the leak became a hypnotic, horrifying symbol of a crisis spiraling beyond anyone's control. It was, as Obama writes with unusual emotion, like a malevolent presence actively taunting him. The disaster became known as Obama's Katrina, and his approval ratings plummeted. He felt like he was trapped in a barrel, tumbling helplessly through crashing waters, completely powerless to stop his descent. While simultaneously wrestling with the economy and the oil spill, he was also commander-in-chief of a military at war. He inherited two conflicts. He began the slow, methodical, politically treacherous process of winding down the war in Iraq. But Afghanistan was an entirely different story. The situation there was rapidly deteriorating, and his military commanders, led by the highly respected General Stanley McChrystal, were formally requesting 40,000 more troops. The debate over the Afghan surge became one of the most contentious and painful of his entire presidency. It pitted his deep anti-war instincts against the unanimous advice of his generals and military leadership. It was a debate about military strategy, yes, but it was also a fundamental test of civilian control over the military in a democracy. After months of absolutely grueling meetings in the Situation Room, where every assumption was challenged and rechallenged, he finally chose a middle path. A surge of 30,000 troops, but with a firm, non-negotiable timeline to begin bringing them home. It was a decision that satisfied absolutely no one completely, but it was his decision. It was the lonely, crushing burden of command. And then, right in the midst of all this chaos, came a whisper. A lead, the best one intelligence had gotten in a decade. A courier, a suspicious compound in Pakistan, and a mysterious figure who never left the grounds, only pacing occasionally in a small, enclosed garden. The intelligence was far from certain. The risks were absolutely immense. But after months of secret planning and wargaming every possible scenario, on a Sunday afternoon, May 1, 2011, he gathered his national security team in the Situation Room. He watched in real time, his stomach in knots, as two stealth helicopters slipped into Pakistani airspace under the cover of darkness. He listened, heart pounding, as one of the helicopters clipped a wall and crashed hard into the compound courtyard. And then, after 20 of the longest, most excruciating minutes of his life, he heard the words that would instantly echo around the entire world. Geronimo EKIA, enemy killed in action. Osama bin Laden was dead. The mission was an unqualified, flawless success, a moment of genuine national catharsis. But for Obama, standing in that room, it wasn't a moment of wild, exuberant triumph. It was something quieter, more solemn. It was a stark reminder of the extraordinary unity of purpose that was possible when the nation faced a clear external enemy, and it left him with a nagging, troubling question that wouldn't let him go. Was that the only time such unity was possible? Could a nation ever rally with the same laser focus and fierce determination to educate its children, to house its homeless, or to heal its sick? It was a question that would haunt and define the rest of his presidency, and it lies at the very heart of this powerful, deeply introspective book. A Promised Land is the story of one man navigating the treacherous, unpredictable currents of history, but it's also fundamentally a story about the country he led. It's a testament to the stubborn belief that even in the face of impossible odds, deep divisions, and our own inevitable human imperfections, progress is still possible. It's a story of the world as it brutally is, and a relentless, sometimes heartbreaking and ultimately hopeful quest for the world as it should be. Commentary. As you close the final page of A Promised Land, you're left with a feeling that's both deeply inspiring and sobering at the same time. This isn't just a polished highlight reel of a historic presidency. It's a genuine look under the hood of power, and what you find there is more complex, more human, and far more challenging than you might have ever imagined. The single most powerful lesson this book offers, in my view, is about the constant, grinding tension between idealism and pragmatism. It's a theme that runs through absolutely every page, like a thread. Obama begins his journey as a true idealist, a young organizer who genuinely believes in the power of ordinary people to change the world. But time and again, he gets slammed in the face with the messy, frustrating reality of the, quote, world as it is. He learns, sometimes painfully, that to actually get anything done, you have to make compromises that make you uncomfortable. You have to cut deals with people you don't particularly like. You have to, as his campaign manager told him bluntly, understand that politics isn't always fair or noble. Think about that decision to challenge Alice Palmer's petitions in his very first race. The idealist in him desperately wanted to win on pure merit, to prove he was the better candidate. The pragmatist knew he had to win, period, or he'd never get another chance. Or consider the healthcare bill. The idealist in him wanted a simple, elegant single-payer system. The pragmatist understood that to get anything actually passed in the real world, he had to work within the existing, maddeningly complicated system, even if it meant making uncomfortable deals with drug companies and insurance giants. This is a profound and challenging lesson for anyone with serious ambition, especially if you're young and idealistic. It's incredibly easy to stand safely on the sidelines and criticize, to demand absolute purity from our leaders and our institutions. It's infinitely harder to actually step into the arena and get your hands dirty, to accept that progress is often frustratingly incremental, and that half a loaf is sometimes the only thing realistically on the menu. The book forces us to ask ourselves an uncomfortable question. Is it better to hold out stubbornly for the perfect solution and risk getting absolutely nothing, or to fight tooth and nail for an imperfect victory that actually helps real people right now? Another powerful theme woven throughout is the sheer, crushing weight of the presidency itself. We see the carefully managed public version, the soaring speeches, the formal ceremonies, the confident walks across the South Lawn. But Obama pulls back the curtain on the private reality, the suffocating loneliness of the bubble, the constant, unrelenting scrutiny, the unbearable weight of life and death decisions, and the steep personal cost to his family. His description of the growing strain on his marriage is unflinchingly, almost painfully honest. Michelle isn't just a supportive background character in his story. She is his true partner, his toughest and most necessary critic, and his vital anchor to the life he once knew before all this. Her struggle to carve out her own identity, to fiercely protect her daughters, and to maintain her own sense of self in the blinding glare of the world's brightest spotlight, is genuinely one of the most compelling parts of the entire story. It's a powerful reminder that leadership isn't just about making big dramatic decisions in important rooms. It's about managing the immense personal toll that comes with real responsibility. It's about finding ways to stay grounded, to stay connected to who you actually are, when the entire world is constantly trying to turn you into a symbol or an idea. So what can you actually take away from this today? First, understand the deep power of your why. Obama's entire improbable journey was fueled by his lifelong search for a place to belong, a way to reconcile all the different, contradictory parts of his story into something coherent. That intensely personal quest gave him a deep, bottomless well of resilience to draw from when things got impossibly tough. Before you set out to achieve anything truly great, take the time to genuinely understand your own story. What actually drives you? What is the question you're desperately trying to answer? Your why will be your fuel when your motivation inevitably runs low and the obstacles seem insurmountable. Second, embrace the process, not just the outcome. Obama's entire approach to decision-making, especially on something as complex and high-stakes as the bin Laden raid or the Afghan surge, was all about trusting the process. He listened carefully to every voice in the room, actively challenged every assumption, and deliberately created a space where dissent was not just tolerated but expected. He understood deeply that in a world of probabilities and incomplete information, a rigorous process doesn't guarantee a good outcome, but it gives you the absolute best possible chance. So in your own life, when you're facing a genuinely big decision, don't just trust your gut instinct. Do the actual homework. Actively listen to people who strongly disagree with you. Deliberately stress test your own assumptions until they either break or get stronger. And finally, learn to live with the uncomfortable gap between the world you desperately want and the world that actually exists. This is perhaps the most mature and hardest-won lesson of the entire book. Progress is not a straight line upward. There will be painful setbacks, crushing disappointments, and long stretches where you feel like you're trapped in that barrel, tumbling completely out of control. The temptation to become cynical and give up is incredibly powerful and seductive. But as Obama demonstrates through his entire story, the key is to somehow hold on to your ideals without becoming rigid and brittle, to fight passionately for what you believe in without losing your ability to see the fundamental humanity in those who oppose you. That was the book summary of A Promised Land by Barack Obama. We've touched on some of the major stories and lessons today, but I'll be completely honest with you. A summary like this can only take you so far. The real power of this book lives in the nuance, the rich texture, and the profound introspection that you can only experience by reading it yourself, cover to cover. It's in those quiet moments when a particular story, or even a simple phrase, suddenly connects with your own experience in a way you didn't expect and couldn't have predicted. This summary is designed to help you decide if this journey is one you genuinely want to take for yourself. If anything we've discussed today has sparked something inside you, I really encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history or understanding politics better. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you think about leadership, sacrifice, and the endless unfinished work of building a better world. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable or interesting, please take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button and maybe share it with a friend who might appreciate it. It genuinely helps us continue to bring these potentially life-changing books from the billionaire's bookshelf directly to you. Let's keep growing together, one book at a time.